This is the Everyday AI Show, the everyday podcast where we simplify AI and bring its power to your fingertips. Listen daily for practical advice to boost your career, business, and everyday life.
I get it. AI can seem like the big bad wolf, right? It's hard to understand. It's always changing. And that might be reason that some business leaders don't even dive in. Maybe you say, oh, let's just wait for one of our competitors to figure it out and we'll follow their lead. But actually, the fear of AI is just holding you back. It is stifling adoption. So that's what we're going to be talking about today and more on Everyday AI. What's going on, y'all? My name is Jordan Wilson, and I'm the host, and this show is for you. This is your daily live stream podcast and free daily newsletter, helping us all learn generative AI so we can leverage it to grow our companies and to grow our careers. So if you are in the position where you've been wondering, like, oh, are we actually going all in on AI like we should? We're going to be tackling some of those common hurdles and roadblocks today on maybe why you haven't and some of the downsides. All right. But before we get into today's conversation, which I'm excited to have our guest on the show, we're going to start as we do by going over the AI news. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out the show notes in your podcast for our website, all the links in there. So go to youreverydayai.com for more on the news stories today and our podcast interview. All right. And you got to join our Thanks a Million giveaway while you're in there as well. All right. So for AI news today, a lot going on. ByteDance has launched an AI video app to rival OpenAI's Sora. So ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, has released Jimeng AI, an AI software that generates videos based on text prompts, joining the ever-competitive AI video generation race that we have going on. So the app is developed by ByteDance-owned FaceU technology, was made available on the Chinese App Store on August 6th, with no official word yet on availability outside of China. So the release comes as Chinese tech companies race to compete with OpenAI's Sora model, which was showcased in February and is still in limited testing phase. All right. Next piece of AI news. Computing giant Dell has laid off more than 12,000 employees to focus on AI. So Dell has announced a significant reorganization of its sales division, which includes layoffs aimed at modernizing operations and increasing focus on artificial intelligence. The company plans to centralize sales teams and created a new AI-focused sales unit, as revealed in an internal memo reported by Business Insider. So approximately 12,500 employees, which is about 10% of Dell's workforce, are expected to be affected by the layoffs. So yeah, pretty big news there out of Dell. Last but not least, a new report showed that Intel missed $1 billion opportunity with OpenAI. So a new report from Reuters showed that about 7 years ago, Intel had a chance to buy a 15% stake in OpenAI for only $1 billion in cash. So discussions between Intel and OpenAI took place over several months in 2017 and 2018, and Intel ultimately decided against the deal, partly due to then CEO Bob Swan's skepticism about the near-term market potential of generative AI models. In OpenAI, was interested in Intel's investment to reduce reliance on NVIDIA chips and build its own infrastructure. The deal also fell through reportedly because Intel's data center unit did not want to make products at cost. So Intel's decision not to invest in OpenAI, which launched ChatGPT in 2022 and is now valued at almost $90 billion, has not been made public until now. So yeah, pretty looking back at it, considering that, Microsoft reportedly invested $13 billion for a 49% equity stake. That $1 billion for 15% is looking really good right about now. All right. So we're going to be having a lot more on those stories and more. So make sure you check out the newsletter at youreverydayai.com. All right. Enough of me blabbing on about what's happening in the world of AI. Let's bring on a guest. One thing is that you have to understand is AI is constantly changing, but that doesn't mean you should be scared. It doesn't mean you should be fearful of it. All right. So please help me welcome on the show. There we go. We have her. So we have Lauren Ingram, founder of Next Big Thing. Lauren, thank you so much for joining the Everyday AI Show.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. I'm a long-time listener, so it's exciting to be joining the show.
Love that. Love having listeners on the show. Lauren, could you tell us a little bit about Next Big Thing? What is it that you do there?
Totally. Yes, we are helping people understand the kind of what's coming down the pipe, what's coming next. At the moment, our current obsession is AI. Before that, it was kind of Web3, blockchain, NFTs. Well, that was the big hype. And then whatever comes next, because, ChatGPT really took people by surprise. And whatever comes next in whether it's 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, is also going to probably scare people, and they'll need help navigating that stuff. And so Next Big Thing does that by things like we have in-person events, we have a podcast also called Next Big Thing, and it's basically about sort of breaking the stuff down, making it way easier to understand, and again, so they don't feel afraid of it.
And we should probably start by saying this, right? Like AI adoption varies greatly by where you are, right? So we have a global audience here in the US, but Lauren, are you mainly working with clients in Europe, or are you working with clients everywhere?
It is all over. I suppose our community is global. In practice, a lot of what I'm doing is here in the UK. I'm based in London, but I think actually probably Europe and the UK is probably a little bit slower on the AI adoption piece. And actually any kind of emerging technologies, the US and Silicon Valley does tend to be streets ahead in terms of that adoption and conversation around it, and sometimes legislation too.
And maybe it's important to even start there, because I think at least here in the US, I'm based in Chicago. It seems like most big businesses by now, kind of at least have their first AI strategy or their first AI implementation already figured out. So when you talk about businesses in the UK, where are business leaders' minds at in terms of artificial intelligence? Because I know that, as an example, the EU AI Act, there's a lot more kind of restrictions and policy based around it. Where are business leaders' minds at when it comes to AI implementation?
I mean, I think the honest answer is it's a bit of a hot mess. That leaders are under, a lot of business leaders are under pressure to try and sort of create a strategy and implementation around a moving target, right? That the actual technology is changing constantly. There are new updates being announced literally every day. And so you're trying to create sort of rules or a structure around, something that's literally moving, like a moving train. So it is a bit of a hot mess. And I do actually feel a little bit bad for business leaders at the moment, because I think they are struggling. So you've got these quite scrappy working groups, especially in, say, a larger business. It might be quite a slow moving working group, and sort of trying to pull in the right people, trying to pull in legal, and just sort of trying to make things happen. And actually one of the issues I'm seeing there, maybe this is getting a bit too granular, but people aren't thinking about the who's in the room in that working group in terms of having a sort of diverse group of voices represented. It's just a kind of like whoever's available or whoever knows a little bit about AI already. And actually, for the most part, they tend to be very male and just not particularly diverse group of voices and backgrounds who are making really important decisions about what's coming next for a whole business and a whole, how it monetizes, the whole strategy. So I just think 2024 is such a key time for every business that is trying to AIify. And so I think people need to try and be thoughtful about, what they're building next, how they're going to do it, rather than just sort of chasing the dollar signs, which I'm seeing quite a lot of. There's a lot of business leaders getting FOMO, and they are focused on those dollar signs and running after that.
And I definitely want to dive into, Lauren, what you were just talking about there about the diverse voices or lack of diverse voices. But I actually first want to kind of skip to the end of this and ask you the big question. Why do you think that there is this big fear of AI, and why or how is that fear actually stifling adoption?
Are you still running in circles trying to figure out how to actually grow your business with AI? Maybe your company has been tinkering with large language models for a year or more, but can't really get traction to find ROI on Gen AI. Hey, this is Jordan Wilson, host of this very podcast. Companies like Adobe, Microsoft, and NVIDIA have partnered with us because they trust our expertise in educating the masses around generative AI to get ahead. And some of the most innovative companies in the country hire us to help with their AI strategy and to train hundreds of their employees on how to use Gen AI. So whether you're looking for ChatGPT training for thousands or just need help building your front-end AI strategy, you can partner with us too, just like some of the biggest companies in the world do. Go to youreverydayai.com/partner to get in contact with our team, or you can just click on the partner section of our website. We'll help you stop running in those AI circles and help get your team ahead and build a straight path to ROI on Gen AI.
Well, I do think that the fearfulness is somewhat legitimate. That there really is a possibility of losing your job to AI, not in a sort of, not quite as directly as that. It's not like a robot is literally going to take your job, but things that were a sure thing a couple of years ago aren't a sure thing anymore. So there is some legitimate fear there, but I do think it's really been stoked by the media that like newspapers gain clicks out of playing into that fearfulness of like, we're all going to lose our job. And it's all quite extreme language. It's all very, it's all quite sort of heightened. And even some of it, like the Daily Mail, which is a sort of big UK thing that I think is globally known for stoking tensions of any kind. And, they talk about things like the jobs bloodbath. So you're literally using like this really violent language about, but what we're talking about is like this automation, like it's not necessarily violent at all. And so I do think it was a mistake to get people so like whipped up into a frenzy about it, of like, oh my God, the whole world's going to end, is what some people seem to be feeling like. And I think that the media has definitely had a big part to play in that, and I think they need to do a bit of allaying those fears at the moment, not just the kind of opposite extreme of like a kind of recently all the headlines seem to be about making sure that AI is making enough money compared to how much is being spent on it. So yeah, it can't only be about the most extreme stuff. I think people just need to better understand the technology a little bit better, what it means for them, but also the kind of the real stuff. Like, what does it mean for me? What's the acronym? WIFM. What's in it for me? Factor. And I know newspapers probably don't get as many clicks and sales out of things that make you feel good, but that's what I'm trying to push for anyway.
Yeah, I think you bring up some great points there, Lauren, and I'm excited to dive into these. But as a quick reminder to our live stream audience, thanks for joining in. So Jay and Woozy and Tara, Josh, Christopher, everyone else, thank you guys. If you have a question, please get it in now. So I do want to go talk about this fear a little bit, because it is warranted, I guess, right? Like, I think I even started the show out by saying, oh, you don't need to be afraid of AI. But I'm like, oh, okay, when it comes to job displacement, I guess you kind of do, right? Like we even talked about, the story there with Dell and those 12,000 jobs. And, even people, I think originally weren't worried about like, oh, I'm not worried about an actual robot AI taking my job. But then we saw news from Figure yesterday with their Figure 02, and it showed off a robot literally working an assembly line for BMWs and being able to see and hear and understand and talk and think, right? Like, it's wild. So, even on that point on job displacement, I don't want to go too deep on this because I talk about this often. What are you saying to clients or colleagues that are maybe asking you about like, oh, is AI going to take my job? And is that fear of AI taking their job actually the thing keeping businesses from using it and understanding it?
Yes, there's a lot to unpack there. But I suppose my main thing that I tell businesses and individuals is around trying to engage with this stuff. Like, don't bury your head in the sand, because actually that's probably the most dangerous thing you could do at the moment, is ignore the potential of AI, because it's got amazing potential in terms of you can upskill in this new thing. I think it's going to be really important to upskill for whatever's coming next. None of us can really predict what's coming. There is the opportunity even for job creation around AI. And obviously AI has been around for a long time. I know we talk about that sort of thing a lot, but this iteration of generative AI is still pretty new. And so there are new jobs, new kind of head of AI roles or head of emerging tech, anything like that. Anybody will be expected to use AI successfully in their job in order to succeed in their own right. So that AI literacy piece, I think, is really, really important. So yeah, not burying your head in the sand. And the overwhelm is also, really, really getting in the way. I think some people are getting really stuck with it, actually, is because we're seeing all these news headlines, even if they're not kind of extreme, it's the sheer amount of news headlines around, like, okay, llama blah blah iteration has come out today, and then like an hour later it's like, okay, Claude Sonnet 3.5 is out, and here's what that means. Everything is like minute by minute updates, and people are tired. They don't know what to do with all this information. Like, how can you possibly stay on top of all of this information about AI? It's not to say they're bored. They're just they've got like information overload. When you get if you're told a lot of new things, you probably do get a bit like, hold up, I just need to process all of that, and there's no processing time with the speed of change in AI. So again, I do think it's this kind of like quite critical moment to try and get people on board with the opportunity rather than the kind of like, right, it's over for you and your job, and thinking about, okay, so if aspects of your job can be automated, which things do you find boring or repetitive, and what can be automated? How might that actually be a big advantage for you? How could that help you do your job better, or you could become more senior, or could you use that to build your own business? There's like all of this is just this untapped potential and unanswered questions, and I would love to help people get curious about that stuff rather than as I say, as stuck as maybe they have been feeling. And actually, again, just returning to the media point, is not to say I don't think we should be reporting on all these minute by minute changes. It's just more like not all audiences want that level of detail. So like for us, for Next Big Thing, we actually don't tend to do that kind of reporting style, because for our audience specifically, because we have such a big focus on making it less overwhelming, get rid of the jargon, just kind of like just what's the most important relevant information. I'm even sort of advocating for like slow AI, of like, don't tell me all the news bit. I'll stay on top of that as Lauren, because it is my job to stay on top of it. But for our community, I can just tell you just the most important bits as and when they appear. That like, even if you were told about these latest updates 2 weeks after the fact, would it actually be that much of a disadvantage, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, you would just feel late to the party. You would just be feeling the FOMO. You would it really have that much impact if you didn't find out about it in time?
That's a good point. Yeah. And something I even personally find myself struggling with, right? Maybe it's probably different for me than the average, person having to talk about AI every single day and having to stay up on it. But I get your point. Yeah. Like, okay, if you're a business leader and you wait a week or two, or you're a quote unquote week or two late on, the newest model, is it going to, set your company back? Probably not, right? Although you, I think, still have to be familiar. One thing that we started to talk about a little bit more, and that I want to dive into a little bit more, is just the diversity of voices needed, and how maybe that lack of diversity is also stifling adoption. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Of course, yeah. Speaking to the kind of women piece, because when I started my business, I called it Women of Web3, because I was initially interested in things like NFTs, blockchain, etc. We've now kind of broadened out to be called Next Big Thing, but a big base of our community or audience is women, and we are seeing women adopt this technology slower than men, and part of that is this fearfulness we talked about. So I think it's 38% of women are sort of trying out AI and these technologies versus 56% of their male peers. So there is quite a sort of a difference in terms of who's like adopting this stuff, playing with it, and then evidently going to go and make the products. Like, all the biggest next businesses in the world, and if they're not just kind of reiterations of the current biggest businesses in the world, are mainly going to be run by men. And I'm not saying that's terrible in and of itself. I would love to see more women going and actually sort of founding businesses in this stuff, because again, it is stifling adoption if you have a lack of diversity in who's building these products. Because if you start diversifying who's in the room making really important decisions, say like, whether it's like board level or those AI working groups I was talking about, if you have diversity of thought, diversity of background, you're going to make better products, because you're going to better suit the needs of more people. And if you think about it in really like mercenary terms, you could make more money if you speak to more people, right? If you build with everybody in mind, you get to sell to everybody. So I see that actually again as a massive opportunity. Like if you don't have more women and more diversity of thought in AI companies, and especially at towards leadership level, you're leaving money on the table. I really believe that it's not just a kind of, like for me, there is a sort of moral obligation around the inclusion piece, but not everybody cares about that, and not everybody should be made to care. But money talks. Like people can make more money if they, build products that speak to everybody, and I think that's just such a such a positive opportunity.
Mm. What can be done about that? Because that's a huge disparity, and I'm even shocked to hear about that. Where it's I'm not good at math on the fly, but it seems that's like 75-ish% higher adoption rate in men than women that you just talked about there. So maybe for business leaders who are trying to implement generative AI in their department, in their companies, etc. What can be done to have a little bit more of that diversity, right? Like if companies, as an example, open, a certain large language model up to the masses, how can they make sure that more diverse voices are coming to the table?
Yes, and also I can see lots of comments coming in after we've just been talking about this. So that's great to see that it's resonating. There's loads we can do to sort of diversify who's in the room and what's being made and what that means in terms of an AI strategy. And one of the first things is that kind of internal education piece. So partly AI literacy itself, but partly trying to bring everybody on that journey of getting people excited, curious, and trying to get rid of that fear in order to get everybody on board and sort of wanting to participate in building what's coming next. Because again, around that, when you talked about the sort of stifling adoption, if you do get people that are kind of stick in the mud about it, or they can't engage with it, they will get left behind. And so that for me, that's a sort of serious fear about women being left behind. And sort of side note, a lot of women I know that are not in the tech industry at all are really quite sort of ambivalent, even like apathetic about the idea of using AI. And I think part of that does stem from this sort of fearfulness, or like, oh, but I'm not an engineer. You're like, well, I'm not an engineer either. I'm a marketer. But I see this stuff as really important for business, aka like society as a whole. All of this stuff's really important. So to help kind of support that, businesses, as I say, need to be bringing everybody on that journey, being thoughtful about who is in the room, who's maybe that can end up turning into a box ticking exercise, but I think it's worth having the thought process around it, or at least a conversation about it of like, who are we bringing in? Partly which departments, depending on how big or small the business is, and partly, who is in the room, and just being thoughtful about it. Having less jargon, like anything that we can do to make technology seem less confusing, the better. Because I think actually that was one of the really big benefits actually of AI, is that unlike a lot of the other emerging technologies emerging technologies out there, it's people can more easily see the benefit of it. So like when if you start using ChatGPT, for example, or any of the major platforms, because you're using natural language, it is actually a bit easier to kind of get going. And I think people get hung up on the idea that they need to know what's inside the black box of like, how does it work? Like what does LLM stand for? What's the difference between that and something else? And actually, don't get hung up on the jargon and the acronyms. Most people will never need to know the difference between that stuff. Like, go and learn it so that you'll just sort of feel more on top of it, and then don't worry about it. Just go and use the technology. That's kind of my main advice to people, is like, just go and dabble. Because as soon as you start dabbling, you kind of go, oh, it's quite useful for that, or like, oh, it made a mistake there. And so there's you can do courses for this stuff, and I do actually proactively tell people to go and do AI courses, free or paid. But going and dabbling is probably the most important part, is like, just go and see for yourself. And as I say, the natural language piece, and I probably would say this because I studied linguistics at uni, so like I care about words. The idea that you can sort of tell a computer to do what you want is different than just going like sort of clicking these sort of pre-made buttons. You can actually have some back and forth and say, oh, actually not quite that, I actually meant this. And it's much more easy and kind of more fun than doing something like Googling, where you're trying to create weird strings of words and like, minus whatever it is, minus XYZ, so you don't pull in the wrong results. It's a conversation with a computer in order to get what you want. And I think that's really powerful.
How can business leaders and individuals find the balance, right? Because I think we're kind of talking about, two different pieces here. So as an example, you recommended not spending too much time worrying about the black box of generative AI, but then at the same time, talking about AI literacy can get rid of the fear. So how do you find that nice balance of actually understanding enough to get the most out of generative AI for your company, but then also not drowning in the constant jargon and updates?
Good question. I guess the more senior you are within a business, you probably do need to know more about what's in the black box, not because you'll be expected to use it, but because you will be expected to sort of better understand these concepts in order to then sort of be building strategies and ways to implement it off the back of that. But for probably 90% of people, just anybody else in a business, you won't need to know, like, as I say, you'll never be tested on this stuff, or at least I would hope not. I would hope people aren't being tested on this stuff. It's like, it does not matter a lot of the kind of ins and outs of it. And I know you care a lot about helping people learn to prompt better. And that stuff is so much more important, is the, like, how do you get the best out of this technology to get what you want out of it, to be more productive, to do cool stuff, to be more creative, even using a robot. That for me is the balance should shift on that side, is like just when I talk about AI literacy, is less about the understanding any kind of technical updates, or I would sort of almost like ignore a lot of the detail and just think about, okay, what does this mean for me, my role, what impact I can have.
And we have a couple great questions here related to just that, Lauren. I love what Tara here is asking. So she's saying, what are some strategies that help with decreasing the next big thing fear?
Strategies that help. Part of it is that just kind of going and trying it out. Is there, like, there's an element of, like, you slightly have to force people, of just kind of just get everybody literally like using it, or even demoing it is probably less heavy-handed than forcing people to use it. But I think there's something really, again, powerful about just showing people how you use it. Because if you remember, actually I suppose I can't really remember the moment I started using the internet. If you were just, if you've never used the internet before, whether we're talking about the 90s noughties internet, or if it was today and you'd never used it before, you wouldn't know how to get started. Like, there's obviously so many things, amazing things you can do on the internet, online, and whatever platform, but how would you go and find those and start using those to your advantage? You would just, be looking at this sort of blank screen in a way. And so you kind of need to be shown by, whether it's your peers, your colleagues, whatever, of like, oh, I've found this thing and this is really helpful, and just, literally demoing it. So I try and do as many little demos, even if it's like down the pub, or like showing my mother-in-law, whatever it is, just like showing people this stuff, because then they can start being like, oh, is that all it is? Like, I remember talking to actually my cousin at Christmas, and she was like, oh, has your job kind of changed? And I was trying to describe what I do, and so I give different answers according to who I'm speaking to. Sometimes I'm an AI consultant, sometimes I'm can't remember what I call myself, but I just said to her, I was like, oh, I teach people about ChatGPT, because I was thinking maybe that's like vague enough that it kind of makes sense. And she was like, the what? And I was like, oh, like AI? And she was like, oh, I don't really know about that. And I was like, oh, okay. And I actually didn't sort of know how to further the conversation at that point. And she was like, oh, I think my kids use that for their homework. So it was you do need some what's the word, like common ground to be able to sort of get going. But demos are always super helpful.
All right. And I think we have time for one more quick question here from Melissa, asking, what would be your advice on someone getting into the game, or the AI game? And what's your advice on getting the next generation ready for AI?
Ooh, another great question. Thanks, Melissa. So getting into the game, I would say, don't pressure yourself to know everything. I know that's sort of similar to what I said before, but it's fine to take baby steps. So whether it's, as I say, free course, paid course, go and do the PPP course, just kind of get started, maybe commit to, even like, just tell yourself, I'm going to learn for 5 minutes every day. And then inevitably you'll end up spending longer than that because it's fun. And I would also, importantly, share your learnings. If you can be sharing that, whether it's like just within your own, literally like your team, like I'm going to share with the other marketers in blah, blah company, or I'm going to share it on our internal platform, or sharing your learnings on LinkedIn, be like, oh, I didn't realize ChatGPT hallucinates if you try to get it to do this. And then when people start seeing you talking about AI, they instantly, they see you engaging, and you actually end up becoming a bit of a thought leader, whether it's in a sort of, as I say, the baby steps sense. You're not going to be like an instant AI expert, but that's okay. And in terms of advice for getting the next generation ready for AI, I think the younger generation, like say the kind of teenagers of today, they're actually sort of primed and ready to like get going with this stuff. They don't have the same hangups as we do about some of this stuff. Like it's very natural for them to kind of get going. And so again, a lot of it's comes down to mindset of like getting people curious about this stuff. And maybe if you are a parent trying to understand what your kids' schools, like what their approach is to AI, because like it is going to be a bit of a wild ride over the next few years, trying to work out like how do you get kids to do homework if a ChatGPT could give a perfect answer. And kids will do some cheating in the same way as we've tried pulling Wikipedia answers into our essays. It's the same problem, but I think there'll be teachers doing things like they'll say, okay, use AI to generate the perfect answer for your homework, bring that in, and then let's discuss it how you would make it better or more like your version of things. And so to kind of do the automation yourself and then add the human creative exciting bit.
I love that. So, Lauren, as we wrap up here, because we've gone over a lot, we've talked about strategies to get over AI overwhelm, how AI literacy can combat AI fears, and how bringing more diversity to the table can help in the long run and the short run. But what's your one most important takeaway for those listening who maybe are still fearing AI a little bit, but are really worried about adoption?
I would say, don't worry about the FOMO. We are still actually really early in this journey. So don't let anyone assume that you are sort of way behind. And there's still plenty of time to catch up. Plenty of businesses and individuals are just not even bothering or very apathetic about the whole thing. So if you are even engaging in this conversation, listening to a podcast like this, you are moving in the right direction, and you have a potential massive first mover advantage.
So such a good takeaway message there. Lauren, thank you so much for joining the Everyday AI Show and helping us work through this little bit of fear of AI and take many steps closer and much larger steps toward AI adoption. We very much appreciate your time.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
All right. And hey, as a reminder, everyone, we went over a lot. And as always, we will be recapping it in our newsletter. So if you haven't already, make sure to go to youreverydayai.com, sign up for that free daily newsletter. Lauren just dropped a lot of great tips for us all. So make sure to check those out, and make sure to check us out tomorrow and every day for more Everyday AI. Thanks, y'all.
And that's a wrap for today's edition of Everyday AI. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps keep us going. For a little more AI magic, visit youreverydayai.com and sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't get left behind. Go break some barriers, and we'll see you next time.